Welcome to our special meeting and study session, everyone, with a single subject. We're very privileged to have you join us, and we're going to be talking about an update on community feedback and possible approval of the City of Monterey continuing stage 2 of the commercial cannabis roadmap, a roadmap developed by our very famous city manager. And before we go there, I'm going to turn it over to our fantastic assistant city manager, Nat, who's going to explain how all of you can join us if you haven't done so yet, because obviously we'll have some public input at the end of the meeting. So Nat, I'll turn it over to you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Mayor Roberson. We wanted to share that there are two main ways that folks can participate in city council meetings. The first is to join directly on Zoom Gov using the Zoom app that's on your computer or mobile device. And the second method is to join by calling directly into the meeting using a telephone line. To join the meeting on Zoom using your computer, smartphone, or telephone, please use the link or the phone number that's listed on the agenda at isearchmonterey.org. Since the meeting has already started, you'll find the agenda under the Recent tab. To join by telephone, please dial toll-free 833-568-8864 and then enter the meeting ID, which is 160-772-9333#. And if you're prompted to enter a participant ID, press pound one more time. Detailed instructions on how to use Zoom is available on our website at monterey.org/public meetings. To make a public comment using the Zoom app, please virtually raise your hand using the Zoom app raise hand button at the bottom of your screen. If you've dialed in by phone, please raise your hand by dialing *9 and then unmute yourself again by dialing *6. We'll be repeating some of these instructions as we go along with the meeting in open public comment. We will be muting all public commenters until it's their turn to speak. I'll be calling on each public speaker in the order of hands raised, and we will have a time limit established for today's meeting, which will be showing on the screen using a countdown timer. This meeting is also being streamed live on YouTube at youtube.com/City of Monterey. That has about 10-second delay, and then also on Comcast Channel 25 that has a delay of around 90 seconds. As always, we look forward to receiving public comment this afternoon.
Okay, well done, Nat. So we'll call our meeting to order officially and ask our first-class city clerk, Clementine, to introduce the carrying city council, please.
Yes, Councilmember Albert.
Here.
Councilmember Hoffa.
Here.
Councilmember Smith.
Here.
Councilmember Williamson.
Here.
And Mayor Roberson.
And I'm here as well. And hello to all of our council members and our outstanding staff who have joined us. The next item of business will be the Pledge of Allegiance. So we'll see a flag shortly. Then I'll invite you to join me as soon as you can see the flag over Colton Hall. There it is. So please join me in the pledge, everyone. I pledge
allegiance to the flag
of the
United States of America, to the republic
for which
it stands,
one
nation,
under God,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Justice for all. Okay, thank you. And so that gets back to the topic of the evening, as I said, to get an update on community feedback and possible approval of the City of Monterey continuing to stage 2 of commercial cannabis roadmap. And if I will make just a brief introduction, I wanted to let anyone know who's following this, either this evening or through other media, that it's a really interesting topic. We do have in our packet about, I think, 121 pages of public testimony. I say that because I wanted to assure that everyone in the public knows that we did receive and have read a very voluminous report. It's on my laptop. I'm saving paper. Thank you, Council Member Tyler. And So I wanted to assure everyone that we have read them. And if you haven't, the survey, which we'll be getting into soon, very interesting. A lot depends on what format it is, whether it's a community meeting or if it's direct emails and letters, or there's a survey that was done citywide, and it's going to be interesting to look at some of the variances of statistics because of that. And also in the public comments, it ranges from things that we're all familiar with, ranging from cannabis is not legal on a federal level at this point, so it's a cash-only business. However, the Biden administration is making moves and motions towards perhaps making it nationally legal. So you have that element, and there are some folks in their comments who are concerned about, is it a gateway drug? Is it going to be something that is going to appeal to young people? Then on the other hand, you have folks who say they're very well run, that they're pretty universal at this point, and the city of Monterey has an opportunity to collect some tax money. People have pointed out that Seaside has 6 dispensaries without any problems. At the Barnyard, if you go into that particular dispensary, it looks like a high-scale jewelry shop or a flower shop. So all of our public comment ranges from the national discussion all the way down to the local discussion. And basically, as we know, in the state of California initially legalized medical marijuana. And then there was a subsequent vote which legalized recreational use. And then Monterey County has really expanded its use and cultivation and has a very large segment of its budget that comes from cannabis, and they've been using it for a wide variety of things. So all of those comments and observations are in the public comment. They are on record. So as we go forward, I think it's important this evening to hear our staff make brief summaries and enable the council to really give the input and ask the questions that we need to, because ultimately this council is going to be able to decide whether there should be 1 or more cannabis dispensaries in the city of Monterey. And that's really what it all boils down to. Should there be dispensaries in the city of Monterey? And I think all of us have heard from a wide variety of people. So as we get to public comment, it'll be later in the meeting. We'll find out how many folks want to participate. This isn't the time to make a plug for your own dispensary and tell us how wonderful you are, and it is, although we believe you are, and it is to some people. But we really do want to just have an opportunity to digest this information, our first shot at it, and to give direction to the staff. So with that, over to our fortuitous city manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We all can use fortuitous, so thank you so much for that.
Especially on this subject.
Yes, absolutely. Let me share my screen with you. Okay, so thank you, Mr. Mayor, for setting this up very, very, very correctly and perfectly. Today is basically a check-in with the City Council. And when we developed the roadmap for the commercial cannabis implementation in the city of Monterey, one of the most important part for us was to ensure that our staff work makes sense for the public, that we are very much engaged and transparent with all folks from all walks of life, whether they are stakeholders, business associations, residents, neighbors, etc. But the other part also was we want to engage with the City Council and want to keep you updated where we are with respect to our public outreach. And that's what is going on today. We schedule it for a study session because usually study sessions are on Wednesdays, and we are studying topics. And today we made it a special meeting because at the end of this meeting, I would appreciate if the council would consider giving us again the green light and say, okay, continue with your public outreach and continue with the next step of work, which will involve a lot more departments and more preparation work to finally come up with an ordinance or an RFP and go with that in front of the Planning Commission and from there to the City Council for final decisions or final guidance. So today is just a check-in. We are reporting back as we discussed with you in December 1st. On December 1st, we will discuss with you the elements of our public outreach and what we learned. We want to keep it short and brief, our presentations, and it's your pleasure if you want to ask questions after each segment. We will talk just about step 2 today, which is our report back to you. Have we reached consensus? And if you agree with us, because our recommendation will be that we feel we have support through the community to continue down the path, we will basically work on the next step, which is working on the RFP, working on the policies, etc. So that next step will be more involved. Just to show you quickly, because it will be referenced throughout our presentations, we are surrounded by dispensaries, and I just show you dispensaries right now that are here on the Monterey Peninsula. I don't show the dispensary locations in the city of Marina yet, but you will hear references from the finance director as well as from the police chief and our assistant city manager to the number of dispensaries that we already have in the vicinity of the city of Monterey. It's a total of 13 dispensaries, and there will be more data forthcoming. The way we have planned it for today is to basically start with the ending, give you the recommendation first. We don't want to put you on a long suspense, what will they say? Then, as requested, we conducted a financial analysis, and our finance director, Lauren Lai, will present the revenue estimates. We also have online the author or the chief analyst for this study from the HDL companies, Mark Loveless, who is basically a state acknowledged expert in estimating revenue estimates. Then Councilmember Hafer and Councilmember Smith asked us about some crime data, crime statistics with respect to dispensaries. And the police chief will show you some of the data that we have found there. And item number 4 will be a report about the public outreach that we have conducted. And what you will take away from that is that I think we really have received a lot of feedback from a lot of various groups. I think there were over 1,400, 1,500 different points of feedback that we received from different folks, from constituents, and our assistant city manager will report in greater detail about that. And then at the end of that, again, we will bring forward our recommendation, which is that we think we have found enough support to continue walking down the roadmap for the cannabis implementation. We would just ask you today to say, okay, keep doing what you're doing. It would basically just reaffirm for us that what you gave us as guidance in December 1st with your vote at that time, that we continue to explore commercial cannabis as a priority work for our staff in 2021. And here's my word of caution as well, is the next phase will involve a great deal of legal work. It will involve a lot of work by our community development department as well as our finance department to figure out all the different ways of how we are tailoring an RFP and also how we are bringing forward an ordinance. And at that point also, when you decide about the ordinance, we will deal with issues such as how many permits would you like to issue? Where do you want to place those dispensaries? What type of dispensaries, etc. Today or tonight is not the point where we will discuss that because frankly, we don't even know what we would recommend to you at the present time. So today is just reporting back to you. Here's what we have heard from the community. Here's the sentiments that we picked up. Here were the tools that we used. Here's sales data, and here is also the crime statistic that you asked us to deliver to you. With that, I punt it over to our excellent finance director, fantastic finance director, Lauren Lai. And if Lauren can just take this slide, and I will forward the slides as it's required. Lauren, go ahead.
Great, thank you so much. As mentioned, the city received the help of HCL companies to do a cannabis revenue analysis. The report is 25 pages and it's very comprehensive with some background information on the cannabis industry and also on different type of operations. I think for the purpose of this briefing, we'll focus on the aspects that's relevant to the city and the takeaways. Again, it's provided as attachment 1 and there's 25 pages of really useful information. So in a nutshell, should the city consider opening or permitting retail establishments selling cannabis, the report estimates that we could receive between $500,000 to $1.5 million a year in new revenues to the city of Monterey. There's different layers of taxations and fees. I think viewers should know there's a portion that pertains to the state, and then there's a portion that pertains to the city. So the $1.5 million in this number here is the portion that we think would come to the city of Monterey in the way of new fees and or taxes. The report goes on to talk about an important concept, which is market saturation, what's already existing in the general area to provide to consumers. We have in the report 13 retailers in the cities the city manager had mentioned. And so we have to take that in mind. With that in mind, the report determines that the city of Monterey could sustain up to 3 cannabis retail permits. It also highlights, because one of the questions might be, you know, the estimate is a pretty large range, $500,000 to $1.5 million. What are some of the major drivers? Certainly the economics of how much retail is already happening in the general region, but importantly is this concept of location, right? Location, 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 just like any real estate. This business is the same in that it determined that tourist-oriented districts would yield more traffic and more higher sales. And so as we move forward, should we move forward, location is going to be relevant in the context of revenue as well. So when we look at fees, setting aside the state fees, the city fees would be a portion of the state that already pre-exists under the sales tax. We would also get some distribution from our Measure S and our Measure Y. We would also get business license tax, and then new fees such as permitting to cover the cost of permitting the program, and then possibly new taxes related to this particular business type. The combination that would generate the new revenues as listed there in bullet point 1. So again, the report is very comprehensive. I think these are the major takeaways for this stage of the conversation. So I think with that, we're ready to move on, Mr. City Manager.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, what is your pleasure? Do you want to, that concludes our presentation of the revenue analysis. Do you want to ask questions right now, or do you want to have questions, council questions after we have presented all 3 elements of tonight's presentations?
It would be my preference with council's concurrence just to ask questions after each presentation, because I have 2 or 3 just on this alone. Does that sound good to everybody? Because I'm thinking we may have questions, and rather than wait till the end. Okay, if you don't mind, let me start. You answered my first question, and that's quite a large range of $5 million to $1.5 million a year. 0.5. In an estimate. 1.5, I don't know what I said. Thank you. And that was location, I guess, Lauren, was your conclusion on that?
Right. Non-tourist oriented districts are estimated to generate a lower gross revenue and therefore lower sales tax or excise tax for that retailer that would come to the city.
Yes, my second question is, I'm sorry, Counselor, to hog this, but I'll make them quick. And that is this whole idea of saturation and how many additional, sorry, that's Gracie. Nobody sneaks up on the Roberson household, I can tell you that. So how was it determined that there was capacity for 3 more cannabis retail permits? And then what if other cities also added to theirs? I'm just curious how that number, everyone arrived at that number of saturation.
If you don't mind, we'll have Mark Lovelace speak to that. He is the author of the report and the study. So Mark, I believe you're on the call. I would love to have you give an opportunity.
Okay. Hello. By way of introduction, I'm Mark Lovelace. I'm policy advisor for HDL Companies and primary author of the report. When we look at, particularly with retail, in terms of the capacity of the market to absorb new retailers, as noted, we look at the number of existing businesses that are already in the area, and we look at the population that's being served. It's not just the city limits. Obviously shoppers go across city limits, in and out of the city when they're shopping in the larger area. And the city of Monterey is located, on a coastal plain with a number of other cities and separated from other inland areas by agricultural areas. So it creates a very nicely defined area. And with that, we were able to look at the population and determine on a population basis, we have figures to be able to show essentially you need around generally 18,000 to 20,000 people to sustain a successful cannabis retailer. And so we divided that out. But what we have here that makes this really unique analysis and unique situation is the high number of tourists that serve that come into the city every year. And so we prepared this report. We were looking at how do we look at the capacity of those tourists to add to the residential population. And we think that just whereas the overall area is already well served with those 13 retailers, those retailers are not generally in the same places that the tourists are frequenting. So if you find locations where those tourists have reasonable access to encounter these businesses or to find them without having to get in their car and drive a great distance, then the 5.8 million people annually that visit the tourist portions of the city, we equate those with being roughly the equivalent of 58,000 full-time residents. And so with that, we think that could accommodate an additional 3 retailers because that's additional to the residential population. As in the report, it notes that if you had locations that were not visitor serving that are in
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Mark.
Yes.
We're having a hard time, a number of us, understanding you because there's some background noise, I think, coming from your microphone. I'm not sure if there's someone else in the room speaking.
Okay, I'm sorry about the background noise. I'll do my best to try to limit that. If there were a retailer in a non-tourist area where they're having to compete with the other retailers in the larger region, they would have a harder go of it. They'd be at that point trying to split the same retail pie with those existing businesses. So that's why there's a considerable difference between a residential serving retailer and a visitor serving retailer. We saw a significant difference in the tourist oriented areas of the county versus the more inland non-touristy areas in terms of the revenues that we were seeing with retailers.
Excuse me, we're still getting too much background noise and I think it's coming from Mark. Can we just get where we don't have anybody talking behind you?
Okay, I'm sorry. Excuse me, just a moment here.
So if I may conclude what HDL was just presenting to us. So number one is we got to recognize that a dispensary is usually regarded as profitable for every 18 to 20,000 residents, 18 to 20,000 residents. Now, keep in mind that on the Monterey Peninsula, we have about 107,000 residents living on the Monterey Peninsula. And presently, we have 13 cannabis retailers here. So if you take that math to heart, you will see that we are already oversaturated with cannabis retailers by having 13 here, because if, again, 18 to 20,000 residents make a cannabis dispensary profitable, you can see that we are by about 10,000 folks oversaturated with dispensaries. Having said that, what plays into the role of 3 additional dispensaries is that we are looking for the city of Monterey also at 5.8 million visitors per year that come anywhere 5 to 6 million visitors. The analysis used the number of 5.8 million. And then if you apply some magic to that, average stay, average length of stay, average party stay, they translate into about 58,000 additional residents, an impact of an additional 58,000 residents. So if you look at that number, Mr. Mayor, the idea basically was, okay, 58,000 translates to another 3 dispensaries plus the existing marketplace. So the study came to the conclusion 3 are probably a good number.
Good, thank you. Then if I could just dwell on my third question with respect to fees and taxes. As we know in California, one of the rationale behind a permitted dispensary is that it's legal, the cannabis is tested, you don't have various toxic ingredients added to it as you do on the black market. So that's one of the arguments for it. On the other side is it's been so heavily taxed that it's actually increased the amount of black market activity because people find it onerous to pay the high fees. So again, this isn't a simple subject, is it? But as I'm understanding the taxes, there's our general sales tax, which in Monterey is 9.25%. And we're able to sequester about 1.5% of that ourselves through Measure G and Measure S. Then the rest going to the state. I'm interested in what fees would come to the city, and very interested in the cannabis tax voter approval required. That's the one I think I have the most interest in. So if I was accurate on my assessment, could we just address those questions, please?
I want to add to your list, which was a great list, Mr. Mayor. We would also get 1% of the state tax, the typical state Bradley Burns tax. We get 1% of that. Plus we get 1.5% from our Measure S and Y. The business would also pay a business license tax. So that would be part of what we would get. There would be a permit application, and the voter approved required would be the report in the HDL report recommends between a 4 to 6% tax on cannabis. Again, trying to balance that illicit market versus the compounded tax rate, which was your point a moment ago. So in order to enact that cannabis tax, city voters would need to approve that tax at an upcoming election. Again, the report recommends between 4 to 6%. There's also a chart within the report that delineates the different tax rates amongst the city and the county within Monterey.
So that 4 to 6% voter approved cannabis tax on cannabis only is reflected in bullet point 1 in the estimated revenues.
Right.
Okay, good. Thank you. And thank you, council, for forbearing with me. Other council questions at this point?
I do. I have a question.
Councilmember Dan, please.
Thank you. Mark, thank you for your report. It was very interesting reading and very in-depth, and I appreciate you putting that together, your company. The question that I have is, I understand the way that the 3 cannabis retail permits were put together. I understand that. But if you were to take any cannabis dispensary out of the tourist areas of our city and place them in non-tourist areas, would they be sustainable enough in our city to be able to survive just on one outside of our tourists?
That's what I was trying to speak to when I was having the background noise, which I apologize for. So the non-tourist areas, because they'd be serving the same resident population, they may very well be able to survive, but that would depend upon their ability to compete and to gain market share from existing retailers. One of the general rules that we see with cannabis is that the existence of retailers in an area doesn't tend to drive consumption. As noted, there's still a persistent black market in California, and so people that desire to consume cannabis, even in places where no cannabis is available, no legal cannabis, still find ways to obtain it. So when you add a new retailer, that doesn't mean you're going to see the collective sales go up unless they're accessing a currently unserved population, such as the tourist population that we're discussing. So outside of that, they may well be able to compete, but they're not going to be adding to the overall sales. What we would imagine is that they're going to be just dividing the same existing retail pie among the existing retailers. So they would have to, it would be up to their choice of location, their business acumen, their marketing abilities, and all of the other things that affect any other retail business out there, whether or not they would be able to succeed in fighting for market share.
Okay, thank you. That was the only question I had, because many of the questions were already asked by Mayor Clyde. So,
if I may, I would like to. There was one comment there about the with legalization, the availability of licensed retailers around the state, that the black market actually increasing. And just as a minor tweak to that, what we've actually seen is that the black market has, it's not that it has increased, but it hasn't come down as much as had hoped. And actually, if we look at the figures for the persistence of the black market, the remaining size of the black market is actually in keeping with the remaining prohibition in California. 70% of communities in California still disallow any legal cannabis retailers, and that's consistent with the percentage of the black market that remains. So essentially, where people don't have legal access to cannabis, they're going to be seeking out illicit sources.
Well, Mark, did you say 70% have not?
70% of the jurisdictions, and it's about 70% of the landmass of California that is, at least an hour from the nearest retailer. Of course, the population, that's much more rural areas, and the population is a lot thinner in those areas. But by number of jurisdictions and by the landmass, it's pretty consistent with the remaining size of the black market.
Interesting. Okay, other questions from Tyler or Ed or Alan? I'm sorry, I can't see our whole council on the screen for some reason, but.
I have one question.
Yes, please, Council Member Allen.
Now when you're
Councilmember Hoffa.
Okay, yeah, thank you. So during our early meetings on this topic, I think there was some discussion about whether the city, if we went forward with this, would approve medical cannabis or sort of adult commercial retail cannabis. Am I understanding your report accurately that a medical only would really not be financially viable in the current marketplace?
Medical only may be viable, but it would be a much smaller operation. There's approximately 9 to 10% of cannabis consumers that are, or cannabis sales that are medicinal. And so that's a much smaller portion, obviously. We have seen in places where communities where that only allow medicinal cannabis sales, that the portion of the consumer base that takes the time to get their physician's recommendation and to qualify as a medicinal patient goes up. In places where adult use sales are available, fewer people take the time, whether or not they're getting a physician's, going to a physician and getting some sort of a recommendation or not, it's not necessary for them to just provide that recommendation to be able to purchase cannabis. So we see.
And Mark, so then
Yes.
from the city's point of view, in terms of revenue, is it fair to estimate about 10%? So maybe we would get somewhere on the order of 50,000 to 150,000 if we went that route.
In the case of Monterey and with this analysis, because we were looking at the unique attractors of the tourist-oriented areas, what we're really looking at here is, frankly, being able to capture almost unintended sales. People that are encountering a cannabis retailer that maybe have a slightly higher interest in going into a place when it's not in their own community. They don't, there's both a novelty factor, an adventure factor from being on vacation, and the fact that you don't have to worry about your neighbor seeing you walk into a cannabis store.
So we would basically lose out on the tourist market because they're not likely to show up with a medical card or go off and get a medical card while they're here.
Yeah, they're unlikely to be traveling with their physician's recommendation in their pocket. Very few people take the step of getting the state-issued medical marijuana identification card. There's only around 6,000 of those in the entire state because it's just really not necessary at this point.
Thanks.
Interesting. Councilmember Ed.
Yes, thank you. Good questions so far. I guess this one would be for Mark. In the study on packet page 14, there's a cannabis taxes in nearby jurisdictions chart. Watsonville, Salinas, and finishes what's recommended. So could you explain a little bit about the various differences when it's under nursery and retail? So as an example, Watsonville is $1 a square foot for nursery and marina is 5%. So explain to me where that discrepancy is. How are they charging? And are there jurisdictions that actually set a square foot of the retail space that is akin to revenue expected based on square foot rather than gross sales?
Yes, there are some jurisdictions. I can't tell you, I don't have names at the moment for some of the ones that have chosen to go a square footage route for retail. I'd say that that's very uncommon, but it does exist. And there really isn't any sort of consistent ratio of square footage and profitability for retailers. So doing it on square footage, taxing the business on square footage for a retailer is not going to give you a very good projection for how much you're going to get. A 2,000 square foot retailer in one community may generate far more revenue than a 10,000 square foot retailer in another city. There just isn't any consistent for that. And as far as nurseries go, as you can see, there's quite a variety of taxing platforms for nurseries, and the square footage is still the most common. It's usually considered a variation on cultivation, so that's quite common. But it really ranges quite a bit in terms of how they do that. Nurseries, one of the differences between nurseries and the other types of cultivation is that there isn't a size basis for nurseries. the license types, the state license types for cultivation are all based on size, up to 10,000 square feet, up to 20,000 square feet, up to a full acre, things like this. And so that gives you a sense of exactly how big the operation is going to be and how much tax you can generate from it just based on the license type. But there's only one category for a nursery, and it could be anywhere from 1,000 square feet up to 100,000 square feet or more.
Okay, great. And the next question I had is looking at the cumulative cannabis tax in packet page 29 for others to follow along. That's a very difficult chart to follow. I'm sure if I read it 10 more times, I would maybe understand a little more clearly. But Mark, you've got me on this one. So here's the question. Cumulatively, this is a chart that is estimating sales tax, local tax at 10%, and where does the state excise tax come in? So what is the total amount of tax that's showing on this chart if there was a producer price at $1,000? So gross sales of 1,000 is how much tax on this chart?
So in this case, this is showing on the producer price. That's the wholesale price when the cultivator is growing it, and that's of course the smallest portion of the price. It's going to keep every time that product changes hands, going from the cultivator to a distributor to a manufacturer to another distributor to the retailer. Everyone is going to be adding on their own markup, and so the price will keep building. And so the purpose of this chart is not necessarily to try to show you anything exact, because producer prices, some product can be a high of $2,500 per pound, a low of $300 a pound, or even trying to get rid of low quality product just to get it out the door. They might even go below 100 sometimes. So it really can vary. 1,000 is just a very general midpoint price that we use for as much as for simplicity's sake as anything else. But as it changes hands, each step along the way, they're going to add their own markup to it. And so the tax that's going to be applied is going to be based on its value at that point. Cultivation, of course, being taxed on the per ounce rather than price. But then as the price builds, you can see the effect of it. The goal of this chart is to demonstrate that even before the city considers applying any taxes to it, that product already has probably a 25 to 26% cumulative tax rate already built into it from all of the other steps along the way, just at the state level. And so when we look at trying to keep the cumulative tax rate to at or around 30%, that's where HDL has targeted our recommended tax rates for all of the communities that we work with, is trying to keep things at a consistent 30% cumulative rate, so that the businesses in each jurisdiction can remain competitive, recognizing that that product is, very, very rarely, if ever, going to be entirely moving within one city. That might be cultivated in one place, shipped off to another city where it's going to be manufactured into edibles or salves or whatever. And then another distributor may be, moving it to retailers all around the state. And so the tax rates are going to be a collection from jurisdictions all around California.
But the point is that you're saying that a producer exchange to a retailer, there is a tax associated to that determined by whatever the jurisdiction agrees is the right amount.
Yes, each jurisdiction that is host to one of the businesses along the way, whether it's the cultivator, whether it's a distributor, manufacturer, or the retailer at the end of the supply chain, may or not be applying their own tax rate to it. There are certainly some cities or counties that don't apply any taxes to certain steps, but it'll be, it's going to be subject to tax rates from a variety of jurisdictions in almost all cases.
So I guess the highlight point on this is that there is a lot of revenue tracking, oversight, regulation, and someone has to be able to do that that's in a position that's working for a city to make sure that the appropriate amount of taxes are collected. This is one illustration just on the producer side where taxes come into play, which would require some oversight. And just the report is on a tax consideration, but doesn't really touch on the depth and breadth or the cost to a city to dive in on the regulation side. Nor is there anything in here that I can see that talks about the amount of staff that it would require all along the lines for the oversight, regulations, and monitoring of the business, from public safety all the way down to collection of taxes.
Yeah, that is correct, council member. This will be part of the staff work ahead of us to identify what kind of cost we estimate, which involve the permitting cost and the ongoing monitoring cost. So that is still a step that we have to deliver. This particular report just shows you what is the real, what is the estimate with respect to sales tax.
Okay, and that's all I had for right now, Mayor.
Okay, good. Any more questions? Councilmember Dan.
I'd like to get back to medical cannabis dispensaries. I'm still kind of confused. What is the reason or the advantage of a patient going to a medical cannabis dispensary versus a recreational? Is it because the product is cheaper, or they can apply through insurance, or because they have a medical prescription? What is the difference between those two?
Yeah, I think this is, and Mark can add, of course, more from the sales tax perspective, but what our public outreach also revealed to a degree that you have the majority of the operators are basically saying that the medical part of the commercial retail operation is a very small portion of the business, and that they offer in commercial retail cannabis operations, medical marijuana, as well as recreational marijuana. And they will explain to you that this also, and as Mark pointed out, that this doesn't require any of those medical cards, and they can sell it through there. And folks can get medical marijuana out of other commercial retail operators. And but by itself, the majority of the operators told us they cannot exist. On the other hand, we also learned through the public outreach from a medical marijuana facility operator, and I'm not sure if this operator will call in later as well, that this operator was very strongly advocating for having a medical commercial cannabis operator alone also is profitable. That operator convincingly presented the business case that made that dispensary, that particular dispensary, profitable. It required to have a pharmacist on site. It required medical consultation inside the dispensary. So I would cautiously say, Councilmember Albert, that's something we have to further explore because I think there were good arguments made on both sides, and I would not necessarily just at the present time say that a medicinal marijuana facility by itself cannot exist. I would look into this a little bit more and a little bit deeper, just based on the feedback we have received.
Thank you.
All right, I think we're ready to go on to the second presentation. And again, we want to thank our public for your patience. The council once again seeing this for the first time, well, the results which got published earlier this week. And it's good and well to take the time, because we know a neighboring city has complimented us on our way that we're approaching this to make sure that we have residential and citizens input, if not buy-in, to the process.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I think we are so grateful for those questions, and as you can tell, the responses that we have prepared for you, as well as telling you, well, we have to look into certain questions further along. I think this is very productive. The next 3 slides will be presented by our Chief of Police, and they are based on your request from Councilmember Harper and Councilmember Smith. On December 1st, basically, you were asking us, show us a little bit of data surrounding service calls for police in dispensaries. And with that, I punt it over to the Chief of Police, Chief Hobart.
Thank you, City Manager. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. As Hans related, as requested by council members, the Monterey Police Department has collected and analyzed crime data. Data was gathered for the 5 cannabis businesses located in Delray Oaks and Seaside from the date the business opened to October 28th, 2020. Additionally, 5 pharmacies were selected in different areas of Monterey in order to compare the data to other businesses. And as you can see from this slide, and I'll talk about this a little more, the violent crimes, there were few instances, but the potential, as I've talked about before, due to the product and the cash, and also the quality of life issues having to do with odor, parking, smoking, calls for service. We saw some of that, as I've discussed before, but we do believe that both these issues can be greatly mitigated with regulatory guidelines and good safety protocols and enforcement. And that, if we could go to the next slide. City staff's data analysis shows no significant differences in crime when comparing pharmacies and cannabis operators. The average number of police calls per year among the 5 cannabis operators in Delray Oaks and Seaside is 1.8. While the average number of calls per year among the 4 pharmacies in Monterey is 3.5. And as I've related and previously discussed, there is a potential for an increase in violent crime because of the cash-based nature of the businesses, and that there may be quality of life concerns, as I've already discussed. Commercial cannabis operations in Monterey may result in an increase to the police department's workload, diverting police resources from other priorities. But as I've discussed, a regulatory system can be implemented to mitigate most of these concerns. And this table simply shows the pharmacies in comparison to the 5 cannabis businesses that we looked at on the peninsula. And with that, that concludes my presentation, and certainly available for any questions.
Oh, thank you, Chief. Chief of the finest police department in the state, if not country. And question, first of all, is if you compare a pharmacy to a dispensary, dispensaries, as I said earlier, because of the federal government, can't use the banking system, still considered illegal federally. So you have the cash on site, but at a pharmacy, would the calls be related to people trying to steal the drugs or the money?
Well, we just selected a different kind of business, and I think, selected pharmacies. We could have looked at liquor stores. We could have looked at any other type of business. So in doing that, there was a multitude of crime. We looked at every crime type that we had a police report for. And those came from both the pharmacies and from the dispensaries. In this graph, we did take account of the petty thefts and excluded them, because in pharmacies, there's such a high number of petty thefts that it skewed the data. So this data does not include those petty thefts, but it's a gamut of various things that have happened at both the dispensaries as well as at the pharmacies.
Yes, because if you look at a pharmacy, they have so many other products that are non-medicinal that would skew it. Yes. The second, go ahead, Chief.
And I was just going to say that we were just trying to compare it to some other business, and you know, the businesses aren't going to be exactly the same. So we
Right.
thought that that might be something that, and there are going to be differences that would be a good comparison.
One of the comments in our packet of 121 pages raised the question about smoking. And there's obviously the health question. Do we have any evidence, and it might be Mark or someone else could answer this besides Chief Dave, and that is there any increased smoking of cannabis and marijuana around the dispensaries versus the...
So I would just relate that I think in some of those comments, and when I gathered this data, I only gathered data from what we call our records management system. So that's where there's an actual report. We didn't do it by the computer-aided dispatch where you could get different calls, and when the officer gets there, there's nobody there. So that's a hard one to really study, is smoking. I know that we have heard about complaints that smoking is going on and that kind of thing from talking to other entities and that kind of thing. So I don't have any hard data to show that, but I think that that can be something that is one of those quality of life examples that I use. And I don't know if Mark has any other thoughts on that.
If I may share a few data points that we learned through the public outreach. Number one, it is a concern of the public that they do not want, the Monterey residents do not want to smell cannabis smoke anywhere, and not in the downtown area, not around the dispensaries. And they don't want to smell it in the apartment buildings. So that's one of the things we have to tackle over the next couple of months, should you tell us to go forward. The other thing that we heard also from the operators when we discussed that they also have strict conditions of approval, and they are also self-enforcing that their products are not being consumed on site. And I'm very sure that we have later on the call some of the operators, and I'm sure that they will make a reference to that as well. So yes, that is a possibility. Yes, we can regulate that. We have to take this under consideration, and there is a lot of regulation by the operators themselves to ensure that they are not violating their conditions of approval for their permits.
I think that's a great point. It is illegal. It's against the law to smoke marijuana outside of the business. And so if we do make that part of the regulatory process, that these businesses would be responsible for enforcing that, that's one of those things that could mitigate that issue.
On those mitigations, would there be a use permit? So if the permit was violated, the use could be pulled? Is
Yes.
that the regulatory road we would take?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Council questions, comments? Councilmember Dan.
Thank you, Chief Wilbur, for your report. I have a question about security at the other dispensaries in other cities. I do notice when I drive by a couple of those dispensaries that I do see an armed personnel either inside or outside. Is it required that they are outside or required that they are inside? And do they carry actual weapons? I'm not sure. I didn't see that closely.
So those are outstanding questions, and those are questions that, as we kind of go through this process, we need to look at what best practices are. And that's one of the questions that I've been asked before is, do we have armed guards or do we not have armed guards? And I don't at this point know what the right answer to that is, but certainly my staff, if you decide to move forward with this, is going to investigate, because different entities do different things. And so that would be in next steps. Let's look at what best practices are, and then my staff and I would probably decide whether we think that's a good thing or a bad thing. And it's the same with all of the security parameters, and there are best practices. Some of those might be cameras. Some of those might be, like we've talked about, that the business is responsible for not only the business, but the parking lot surrounding the businesses. If we're talking about nuisance issues that surround sometimes the odor, it's not just the odor that comes from smoking, but if you co-locate one of these businesses in a large building that has the heating and cooling that's going throughout the whole building, that could spread that odor. And so do we look at that when we're deciding
Wow.
where these should be located, if they're located with other businesses? Those are all things that we haven't gotten into the details yet because we're waiting to see what your direction is. And then we'll research those things. And it's both a land use issue as well as a regulatory issue that we'd have to work hand in hand to deal with those issues with.
Thank
That's
you.
great. Tyler, did I see your hand up?
The chief kind of spoke to it when he was responding just now, so I kind of lowered my hand. But my question was going to be just if he could give an idea of the potential safety measures that we could potentially institutionalize as we move forward here, just to kind of give the public some perspective.
So again, we need to look at those. I mean, there's some very basic things that we talk about with hardening, what we call target hardening the business, right? So we're going to talk about surveillance systems. We're going to talk about the processes that they go through to lock up. We talk about the hours of operation. We talk about, I think Ed talked about some of the issues that surround some auditing that fiscal would have to deal with. So there's a lot of issues that go into that, but it's just extending what you would think if you're talking about making sure that your own home has various ways to protect it. We would do that with this kind of a business to make sure that they have those things and things surrounding people inside being able to monitor what's going on outside, giving us access to interior cameras, exterior cameras. So there's a lot of things that we would go into, and getting back to the guards, you know, what do we think is best for guards? And we need to look at that and see what we think would be best for the requirements that surround that. There's a whole lot that goes into it though, not just from the security aspects of regulation, but also from the auditing aspects of regulation. And quite frankly, there are some really good business models in this industry that we can look to for best practices. And that's certainly what we will research in the next phases.
Thanks, Chief.
Excellent. Mark, do I see your hand up?
Yes, I just wanted to, if I may, add to that a little bit that it's very common for cities when they allow or develop a regulatory program for cannabis businesses, in particular retailers, to put in place very strict security requirements. They have to provide, before they can even get their license to operate, they have to provide a security plan. In many cases, it will include, as noted, on-site security guards, sometimes 24 hours. The requirements for surveillance cameras, for records retention for those cameras have, in many cases, been shown to actually improve the overall security of that location and even extend it to the surrounding businesses because of the surveillance aspect. So in some cases, we've been able to see that it can actually make an area more safe to have that retailer in place. In some cases, it also just moves whatever level of crime there may be a block away or something like that. But all of these are decisions that the city council would be able to weigh in on and determine exactly what level of security they want to require, what kinds of mitigations they want to require. As a note regarding the odor issue, in California, all consumer cannabis products have to be complete sealed, airtight. There can be an allowance for having a certain amount of product unsealed so that people can actually, see it and smell it or whatever as part of the purchase, but that isn't available for sale. That's only for display. And that's also something that can be limited by the local community.
Okay, thank you. Good. Councilmember Ed? Unmute, please.
Sorry about that. I want to go back to the chief's report packet, page 34 and 35. Chief, in your snapshot review of what was happening with some of the other municipalities and their retail outlets, it looks like you were only able to get data for 5 of them versus the 13 I think we have in our region. Is that correct?
Yes, so in Marina, there are some, but those had not yet opened. So obviously they didn't have any data. And it was my understanding we wanted to get the data from the peninsula entities. And so we did those that were close to us. We didn't get the ones that were in the county areas, nor in other parts of the county, like Salinas and South County.
Okay, and the data set and your footnote does point out for the 5 that are here, the data period for the cannabis operations is just from October of 2020. So really a 4-month snapshot of those 5 distribution locations. Is that correct?
Well, it's a little nuanced in that some of these businesses have been open longer than others. So for example, the location in Delray Oaks, we got data from July 1st, 2015 to October 28th, 2020, because that was the entire time that they were open. For higher level in Seaside, that's only been open since August of 2018. So we had a shorter period of time. So we collected data from the time they were opened until October 28th, because I think we talked about this in September. So I had staff doing that, and they did that until October to start getting the data. So it's different collection times that we got that. Now, Nat was able to take that data and format it so that he could come up with what the average calls per year was. But the hard data is provided there for you in the packet.
Yeah, so that we can compare apples to apples. We converted essentially the number of days of operation for each of the businesses, both the cannabis and pharmacies, converted those to years to get our average police calls per year to compare them side by side.
Right. So you assuming that they'd been operating 365 days, you came up with a projected average, but only using the limited number of months you had. Just the footnote is just saying data period for pharmacies is from July. So that's why it caught my eye, because you just didn't look at pharmacies. You actually looked at those that were open prior to October 20 as well. So the information I'm looking at is just talking about the second line. Pharmacies is for July 1, 2015 to October 20.
That's right. Yeah. So exactly. So for pharmacies, we have a 5-year period of data roughly, and then for the cannabis operators, their data is based on how long they've been in operation. Some several years, some only 6 months. And to compare apples to apples, we converted each of those into years based on the number of days.
Okay, I'm sorry, my eyes are, I just needed more footnotes to explain that because the data set wasn't making any sense to me. I appreciate the explanation. It makes sense now. Thanks.
Good. Other questions from the council? Councilmember Allen.
I don't have a question. I just wanted to thank the chief and the staff who put this together. I found this very informative. And this is the kind of data that I like to be able to make policy decisions.
Okay, thanks for that. All right, Hans, we'll go to our third presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Our Assistant City Manager, Ned Rossa-Nashatira, will explain what we did with respect to public feedback, and the following slides will basically show you. I think that we had an unprecedented outreach campaign that culminated in making some statements and basically, as I stated earlier, in our already given recommendation. And with that, I punt it over to Ned.
Great, thank you, Hans. And as Hans mentioned earlier, through our public feedback, we received over 1,800 points of feedback through whether that's surveys or participation in town hall meetings and other events. We held 2 heavily publicized virtual town hall meetings, and those drew around 60 participants. Overall, the feedback from both the town hall events as well as email feedback is that there is a general broad support for having a limited number of commercial cannabis operators here in the city of Monterey. We also conducted several roundtables with the business representatives through the chamber, as well as individual meetings with each of the business associations. And we saw there was broad support for cannabis operations within the business associations in New Monterey. So that's Lighthouse Avenue, of course, North Fremont Business Association, as well as the Old Monterey Business Association, with the exception of the fact that the folks in Old Monterey stated that they prefer not to have cannabis-based businesses on Alvarado Street itself, but they find it acceptable in some of the side streets. The feedback from both Fisherman's Wharf as well as Cannery Row is that there's not support for cannabis because of the family-friendly nature of the businesses there. And feedback overall from the neighborhood associations, 8 of them specifically show general support for qualified cannabis operators in the city. In addition, we did reach out to community partners. We said that we'd reach out to military installations, MPUSD, MPC, and Montage Health. None of those community partners have expressed major concerns about commercial cannabis operations within the city limits. Now we'll go to the survey results. I know many of you have been looking forward to hearing what the survey results show. We gathered feedback both online as well as through a postcard mail-in survey. The online survey through the Have Your Say Monterey site drew over 1,400 unique visitors to learn more about the important topic. We received 280 survey responses. So these are unique surveys from individuals. 215 of them were residents, 34 were business operators, and 131 are property owners in the city of Monterey. As we look to the next slide, you'll see some, this is a little screenshot of the mailer and postcard. We sent informational mailers as well as business reply mail postcards where folks could fill out 8 questions from the online survey essentially and drop it off in the mailbox. Prepaid postage, we received 1,158 responses in the mail, and we tabulated all that data manually. So now let's take a look at the data for you. You can see here what we did first and foremost was compare the Prop 64 votes in 2016 to the combined surveys, both online and postcard feedback. What you'll see is that those who supported legalizing cannabis in California, there were 69.5% of actual Monterey voters, the 11,000 voters in Monterey who supported Prop 64. Our prediction as staff was that not everyone who supported legalizing cannabis in California may necessarily support actual commercial cannabis operations within our community. And we saw a slight drop off there. 61.9% of those who responded to our survey support commercial cannabis operations in the city of Monterey. So we'll take a look at the comparisons between the postcard survey and the online survey. And the first question that we asked, very broad question, in general, do you support or oppose allowing commercial cannabis businesses in the city? And what you'll see here is the postcard survey showed 56.9% supporting and then 39.5% opposing. And the breakdown of that between strongly support, somewhat, and then strongly opposed and somewhat opposed. On the online survey, you'll see a greater percentage of people supporting, residents specifically supporting cannabis, 70.7%, and then 26.5% opposed. One thing worth noting is the fact that 33% of the postcard survey respondents strongly oppose commercial cannabis compared to just over 18% of those in the online survey. But still, a majority of those in the community, both in the online survey and the postcard survey, support commercial cannabis operations. On to the next slide, I think, is that just again, to reiterate, broad support for commercial cannabis and overall support to limit the number of permits issued. Over 70%, both in the online survey and the postcard survey, showed that they wanted to limit the number of permits issued in the city, and an overall level of support to allow commercial cannabis in commercial districts that are on major thoroughfares or downtown, central business district, but not on Alvarado Street, as I mentioned, not on Cannery Row necessarily, or Fisherman's Wharf, to allow it in neighborhood commercial districts as well as light industrial zoned areas. Some of the overall concerns include impacts on youth, noise, public safety, visual impacts, lighting, and traffic. Of course, many of these concerns can be mitigated. As you know, the packet's quite bulky with 120 pages. Some of the detailed results of the survey can be found in your agenda packet, and we've also posted that on our website, haveyoursaymonterey.org. That concludes the public outreach summary for this afternoon.
Okay, good, Nat. Nat, I think to me the statistic that's most glaring is with the postcards you had, rounding it off, 57% in support of a dispensary. versus the online, which was 71%. So you have a 16% spread there.
That's correct.
And I would offer, obviously, I think people who went online or who probably attended a public forum maybe had more of a special interest in a marijuana dispensary versus the general population. I don't know if that's true or not. That would be one theory. Why the discrepancy, do you think? Because that's a fairly large, going from 57% to 71% in favor, or vice versa, the opposition. That's a fairly large range. Can you help? What do you think?
Yeah, Hans and I have talked about it, and I don't know if Hans wants to say a few words. Hard to speculate.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, you pointed out very well that the online survey requires a different level of engagement. That requires you to go on Have Your Say Monterey, sign up for it, and then go through the task of filling out the online survey, etc. And you sending a postcard to registered voters in Monterey and making them aware, hey, this is going on. What is your opinion about this? Will certainly have reached voters or residents in the city of Monterey who were probably marginally following the discussion, or maybe not following the discussion at all. But now with the postcard survey, they see that the city puts effort behind it. And so I was expecting actually the numbers falling out as they are right now, because I was thinking that we probably get a more true up of the sentiments of our registered voters when we send out a postcard survey, because a lot of them might not be as engaged as those folks are that went on the Have Your Say Monterey website and have participated in public outreach meetings. So it's something like I compared it to when we banned styrofoam packaging for restaurants. You didn't have a single restaurant telling us officially they didn't like it, but you had restaurants telling us through the grapevine that they didn't like it. And so here's I think a similar effect, that now by reaching out to our voters, that they felt they might have heard the first time that we are looking into commercial cannabis operations, and they felt encouraged to state their opinion. So I didn't expect, I wasn't surprised to see a delta between the online survey support and the postcard support. But still, I felt, by looking at the support that we received through the postcard, 57% is a pretty strong support. When you add to that 3.6 not decided, it goes up and down a bit by that, but I felt overall between the two, it makes it palatable to recommend we should continue going down that path right now.
Okay, thanks. Because anytime you're doing an unscientific survey, I don't know if there's any way to how many people responded online more than once using different email addresses. So
they were unique. The online folks were all unique. We have the system is in place to not put more votes in as you have. So that would require a lot of more trickery.
Well, I've got grandchildren, trust me. Trickery is their second middle name, just kidding. Okay, well, thank you for explaining the difference. I think it's important because it does kind of, it's a little bit glaring about that spread or delta, as we call it. Other council comments or questions on this one? Councilmember Allen, please.
Yeah, I've shared this with Hans privately, but I'm wondering if he has any insights on this. So in our household, 2 older voters got the postcards. A younger voter who's been registered in the city since 2012 did not get a postcard. And so I'm wondering if that could have something to do with the disparity. And do we know, was it the 2018 people who actually voted in a particular year? Was that the universe of people who got the postcards? Because it wasn't all registered voters. And then 2, do we know if there's an age differential between these 2 survey results? My guess might be that the one on the left is an older voter base, and the group on the right may be younger, but I'm just speculating. So I'm wondering if we if we could answer those.
If I could just jump in and add on to that, because I was going to make that very point, Alan. I'm glad that you brought it up, and I wonder if there's also some kind of disparity between individuals that are homeowners versus renters who maybe are less willing to respond and participate in surveys because of maybe the busyness with life. So I just wanted to throw that out as a potential thing as staff goes to respond to your comment.
To answer council members Hoffer, question number one, what I learned subsequently after our conversation, council member Hoffer, is that the postcards were sent out to registered voters in the city of Monterey who had participated in the last 3 elections. So these are folks that got the postcard that basically are steadfast voters in the city of Monterey, and not just folks that just registered in November to vote in that election.
So just then that would actually probably be an older electorate and would probably rule out some of the folks Tyler was talking about, namely renters, some of the renters who may have only been here for 1 election cycle or 2 election cycles.
Yeah. And to Councilmember Williamson's question, we of course in a postcard is only so much infrastructure to ask questions, but we can run crosstabs on the online survey where we can identify who is a homeowner and who is a renter. But again, the number is 215. So, but council, let me caution you here. This is not by all means a scientific study. What this is, the purpose of this doing that is to find out that you or we are gauging what is the sentiment of the community right now, because we don't want to do something and then all of a sudden all the stops are being pulled out and we learn about it in the last minute. That was the background of sending out an online the postcard survey as well. And we structured it the way we structured it. Of course, if you want to conduct a scientific study, you do it differently. Now, consider this also: when we conduct sentiment analysis for sales tax measures, you have registered voters in the number of maybe 400 to 700 now surveyed. Here you have 1158 registered voters. Of course, our postcards were sent out indiscriminatorily to registered voters from the last 3 elections. When you do a sales tax analysis, you look at how did they vote, how are they registered, what kind of socioeconomic data is there. We didn't spend the money on doing that. All what we did was we developed the card. We prepaid the postage because we wanted to know, okay, what's the sentiment community? And again, our conclusion is that there is a support of 57% to say, okay, go forward with that right now. We would support it with a lot of conditions, of course, that Ned pointed out in this slide, in the next slide.
Thank you. Good answers, Councilmember Dan. Then we'll go to Councilmember Ed. Okay,
Thank you.
Danny.
I would think that if you took an advisory vote, meaning a special election, just to see how our public feels, our residents feel about this issue, do you think you would get a better response, Hans, than you would for a survey, or do you think that the percentage would change as an advisory vote? Or do you think that's too hard to predict?
I would really be speculating here, but from my instincts will tell me you will get not a vastly different result in an advisory vote. What you would have in an advisory vote, of course, is that you will have then competing campaigns, and you will, in all likelihood, then have to deal with those side effects of those campaigns as well. But my gut instinct tells me that there will be not a fundamentally different result.
And an advisory vote would cost the city how much?
An advisory vote can cost the city a range of cost. It depends on when you place it. If you create your own special advisory vote election without any other elections at that time, it costs you about $300,000. We learned that today or yesterday. If you just put it as part of a general election, or let's say a presidential election, it cost us about $120,000 to $140,000. It depends also on several other factors. How many pages do you occupy in the voters guide, et cetera, et cetera. But it costs you anywhere between $120,000 to about $300,000. And if I have that number wrong, Nat, please correct me right now.
You're
but I
right
think
on
that's
target.
right. Yeah.
And one last question, Mayor Clyde. Have
Yes.
we ever done an advisory vote in the city
Yes,
of
we
Monterey?
did. I recall Mayor Dan Albert having an advisory board of the Monterey Water District.
And do you know what the response was on that? I mean, did we get a majority of people to vote on that? I'm just curious.
I apologize. I don't know. I know the result of that advisory vote, but I do not know right now how many participated.
Clementine.
Hi, I was just looking at information about that election just the other day. It was in 2002. And I believe it was on a general election, so it would have been everyone who was participating in voting on the other topics.
Okay. Enough on this subject. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Clyde.
Yes, we also, I'm sorry, Ed, I'm going to answer Danny's question. We also
go
had
ahead.
an advisory vote on the
yeah.
Monterey Sports Center.
Yes.
And I think it passed 70 to 75%. And at that time, it was an advisory vote. You want a sports center. And secondly, we set a threshold, I believe it was 70% for return on operation. And sorry, there goes the dog again. So that's the background noise. Anytime, Mark, you have background noise, just blame it on the dog. But we had an advisory vote at that time as well. That was probably 1984, 85, somewhere in there.
The only reason I bring that up is not so much what the results of those advisory elections were, but more how much of a turnout did we have? If we had 10,000 people that are registered voters, did we only get 1,800 that voted on it? That was my only reason, not the results itself.
And that's why it's probably the smartest to link it with general elections.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, the sports center vote was part of the general election.
Was the Civic Center also a vote?
Yeah.
I think it was called the Civic Center.
No,
Was
we
that an
did not
advisory
have one.
vote?
We didn't go to vote.
Okay, thank you.
We did have at the time, there was a petition. It was a referendum with respect to expansion of the Civic Center into the parking lot behind City Hall. And the council at that time said, okay, folks, we hear you, we withdraw the ordinance.
So it was more of a survey, did you just say? I didn't hear what
Well,
you
it
said.
turned out to be a survey, but it's the same thing that happened in Pacific Grove on the cannabis, where they were short 5 signatures for a referendum, but that council said, oh, yeah, we don't want to go ahead with, even though you didn't get and pardon me, Mayor Bill Peak, if I'm speaking out of turn, but they didn't quite get enough signatures, but it was clear that they needed to reset.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Ed, thank you for letting us interrupt a little bit.
Oh, no, it wasn't an interruption. Very, very accurate information. I just wanted to point out a couple things. If we look at the internet online survey, there's some evidence in here that we had some that were non-residents. I live near Monterey, so that means that there's people that are responding. They certainly maybe work in Monterey and they're concerned, and that's great, but they aren't registered voters, nor do they live in Monterey. So there's a few there, but we don't know if those were people that said that they're opposed, so it works both ways. The other thing is, when I looked at all the comments from the online surveys, and there's about 37 pages of them, I started to notice a pattern of repetitive, and I looked at some of the names. Some were first name, last name, some just first name, or their online name. But I started to see repetitive comments. So the 37 pages are not all unique comments. There are multiple duplicates in there. So I'm curious, are we certain that we've accurately counted and gone through, and how did we collect the 37 pages of comments? And how do we wind up getting 37 pages with multiple duplicates? And how do we know that those duplicates aren't actually double counted in the online?
Those are great questions. Part of the software banging the table is that there's a process and a monitoring process to check IP addresses, make sure that obviously we if people really want to cheat the system, they can go onto multiple computers and create different usernames. But the unique comments that we've seen are unique when we look at the comments, and they're what you're referring to in terms of duplicate feedback. I'm not sure, Councilmember Smith, whether that's the open-ended feedback or other feedback that you're seeing in the report.
Well, it's word for word a duplicate. You look at the name and you read it on page maybe 2, and then you go to page like 12 and you see the same person again with exactly the same comment. So it lends myself to be, not that by nature that I am, but I'm looking at the data and I'm wondering the question, if we look or rely on a decision using the data from the online, and we come to an assumption that it's 70.7% support and 26.5% opposed, is that data actually really data we can rely on? Where I would look at the postcard survey as being almost exclusively something to believe. And if we believe that, the difference between oppose and support is 17.4%. And of course, that's without a campaign, that's without us doing anything other than mailing. And then we received 1,158 residents returning out of what households, or number of households were probably short of 9,000 households, 8,000 households, 28,500 population, the number of voters. So the number of voters about 13,000, we only got 1,158 back. So in terms of statistical analysis and is it trustworthy, I'm not a data professional, but I come to some great concerns over the data that I'm seeing.
Okay.
Good feedback, and I'm just verifying the data now, and or just re-reviewing this. I believe one of the challenges with or one of the pieces where the survey exports, it shows both those who are residents and property owners. So I do see those cases, as you mentioned, Councilmember Smith, where there's the same person with the same exact open-ended feedback. My understanding is that's the way that the report is exported, because someone may check, I'm a resident of Monterey, as well as I own and operate a business, and I'm a property owner. They're not counted 3 times, but the way that the report is exported, the comments appear to be showing up multiple times, even though the actual raw data isn't counting that person 3 separate times. I hope that answers the question a little bit.
It brings some clarity to it, but I still have some skepticism in terms of the accuracy of the online information versus residents who are taking the effort. And thank you all for the residents that did that, to take the time to read it and comprehend the questions and mail that back to us. That's helpful for me more so than the online. Although the online, I recognize some residents, that's good feedback and good comments. But in terms of reliable data sources, I think we just have to really look at what the household responded with.
Thank you. Councilmember Tyler.
Yeah, so just kind of one comment in regards to this discussion that we're having. I think that a lot of appreciation for the staff for getting this online system up and running as a way of getting public participation. So I think that what we're finding in this experience is working out some of the quirks and kind of fine tuning it. And I think this is good stuff. So I hope it's beneficial feedback that's being provided. But all that to say, I'm hoping that we can actually quickly go to public comments and start getting those, because we have a half hour left, and I want to make sure that people that showed up tonight actually have an opportunity to speak.
I think we're going to 6:30, aren't we?
6 o'clock.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
Tyler, I hear you on that. So if we need to continue this meeting, I think we should do that, but I think it's super important that the council gets all these questions out on the table, because that's going to help the public to answer some of our questions. But you're right, our time is diminishing because we're getting into some really interesting topics of data accuracy and scientific versus non-scientific, and all good questions to help us. But you're right, we'll see how our time goes. So yeah.
Yeah,
I'm sure
I would just say, Mayor, we could reschedule, and it's easy for staff to reschedule 5 council members, but the public, folks that are showing up, may not be able to
Well,
next
that's a good
time.
point. So what do you think, council? We could stop here at the third slide, go public, and then see if there's any time left. Does that simpatico with everybody?
Yeah, I'm ready to hear from the public. If we
Ready to hear.
Hans, what we'll do is we have 2 more slides, I know.
I think
Areas
it's just this slide, Mr. Mayor, and
this is the last slide?
This is just the last slide.
Oh,
and
okay.
Again, it's the same slide that I started with tonight. Again, just to reiterate, we are not making any decisions about implementing yay or nay. It just gave you an update where we are, what we did. It answers the questions about sales tax. It answers the question about crime analysis. It gives you a very good feel where the community stands. And with that, you can decide whatever you want to decide to do today. So it's not a decision to place any dispensaries in our town. It's just, do you want staff to continue working on this or not?
Yeah, good. Thank you for that clarity, because any direction tonight is not to approve a dispensary, because there were lots of questions that were brought up that staff's going to get back to us on with respect to public safety and protocols and regulations, and the where they might go, taxes, votes, etc. So thank you for that. So this would simply be to go ahead and continue the study and analysis. So thank you very much, Tyler, for keeping us moving along. I appreciate that. Now, do we have any idea how many folks are here? Because if we have about 25 minutes, we may have to go 2 minutes versus 3.
That's right. Well, we have 3 hands raised so far, but I'm sure more. Now it's 4, 32 attendees, and more people raising their hands. So I'm happy to put any time limit on there that you like.
Okay. So we're talking, come on, clock, where are you? There you go. About 20 minutes. So let's.
There's around 6 hands raised so far. So more people raising their hand.
Yeah, they will. So let's go 2 minutes with the understanding that this is not the end of it, and encourage people to definitely write us, email us. In fact, as Councilmember Ed pointed out, sometimes you'll get 3 shots at us. All right, well, we're going to go 2 minutes with apologies, but we want to make sure we get everybody included as Councilmember Tyler requested.
Super. Okay, we'll start with our first caller, and it's Kathy, and we'll allow Kathy to say a few words here, and we'll start the timer. Hi, Kathy, welcome.
Thank you. My name is Kathy Bawaya, and I'm a Monterey resident. Good afternoon. First, let me say to the board, Mr. Mayor, thank you for your willingness to serve in your positions. You have a formidable job. I've watched this board make some tough, heartbreaking decisions. While change is difficult, it can also bring new and exciting things to our community. One of my favorite authors, Glennon Doyle, says we can do hard things, and I think this is true. 2021 has been devastating and financially catastrophic to our community. We now have an opportunity to make changes. We are currently on the ground floor, and we have a chance to decide how we can remain viable. I believe we must diversify, be open-minded to what the future could bring. I encourage us to look at the bigger picture. 2 years ago, I was looking to invest in the cannabis industry. I wanted to find an organic, sustainable business with sound environmental practices. I met Steve Weiser and his son Jules, owners of Santa Cruz Farms. I immediately knew I wanted to invest. But the memorable part And the real reason I was so excited to invest was because of Jules, his vision, his unbridled passion for the market's potential. When he spoke with me about what he saw as the future cannabis market, his excitement was contagious. This prospect from both a community involvement opportunity and a financial aspect is incredible. I asked Jules to write down some of his ideas. I wanted to pass these to the board. The words are new, the views are unique, but this market is coming. Other cities are working on details to take advantage of this market now. Steve and Jules are both familiar with the laws, codes, ordinances required within this industry. If
You
we
have
work
10
through the
seconds, Kathy.
stigma and educate our community, our children are already familiar. I believe we can make this market our own, just as we have with the wine industry, ecotourism, and other industries we offer. I believe we can do this in a way that fits our community. Thank you.
Great. Appreciate you calling in, and we'll go to the next caller, and that will be Esther Malkin. Esther, welcome.
Hi, everybody. So I wanted to say what a great job staff has done. And I appreciate the level of outreach that was given to this topic, which I hope is something that we will see in other topics that would interest residents, that we haven't seen this level of engagement before. I'm happy to see that some of my recommendations and questions were addressed, particularly the market saturation one. I'm curious how the police department chose to compare their analysis with pharmacies versus liquor stores. I think it's a more apples to apples comparison if you're talking about liquor stores than pharmacies. I'm also wondering if we were to consider doing possibly two versions and considering maybe a medical marijuana in a type of store closer to residential areas that isn't geared as much to tourists. So I wanted to mention that. I think that the analysis shows that it's important that outreach in the mail was reaching a lot of residents that weren't getting reached. And as far as doing an advisory vote, I don't think that that would benefit our city, because all it would do is flood our airwaves and with tons of special interest money like we see with, you know, propositions and other things, and we certainly don't need that. I don't see why some of these family-friendly areas supposedly don't want it there if they all serve alcohol. So I would encourage that to be taken with a grain of salt and not let the relationship that those businesses have with City Hall be a factor in deciding whether they should or should not. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Esther. And some folks are asking about the last document that we showed on the screen, and similar to the in-person meetings that we have, the previous caller asked for us to show a document publicly. So that's what Clementine was showing on the screen for everyone. We'll go ahead and go to the next caller, John Rico Carr. Welcome.
Hello. I just primarily wanted to say that I think you guys are doing a great job. I definitely appreciate the process that you guys are putting together. I did want to definitely still address the issue again about social equity. I know that you guys had spoken a little bit earlier about whether some of the businesses will be able to be sustainable if they're opened in that area. The Social Equity Act that was put together by obviously the state of California and the governor's office, they appropriate funds to be able to assist these type of businesses. So in allowing a business to definitely at least one of the businesses that come into the area over there and assuring its longevity, the possibility of its longevity, I think it's important that you guys do definitely study a little bit more further on the social equity issue. As I'm not too sure if you guys know yet, but they've appropriated $30 million this past year. There was cities that actually got as much as $2 million to actually help with the process, to help with the actual opening of the business, and to help with also a lot of small business support services for the business. So it's definitely an issue that I wish would be brought up a little bit more as we're going through this process. Hopefully you guys will definitely look into that if you do choose, obviously, to continue on with giving out licenses.
Great, thank you. Our next caller here is Rick Hoyer, and Rick, welcome.
Thank you. I'm Rick Hoyer. I'm a resident of Monterey, a business owner in Monterey, and a commercial property owner in Monterey. I filled out the survey and I did the online one. So I guess you have me in 5 different sets of numbers. I think what you all did for outreach on both surveys are both very valid, very worthwhile infos. I think the postcard is going to skew a bit older, knowing a little bit about how our electorate is, particularly when you're looking at frequent voters. Whereas the online surveys tend to skew younger in people who tend to be filling them out, but both are valid sets of data. I urge you to continue on the chart, on the course you're going, continue looking at the different aspects and moving towards having a limited number of permits in the city with all of the issues flushed out. The other thing is, I think it was great that the police department used pharmacies as an alternative. Yes, maybe liquor stores are more relevant, but the reality of the numbers they showed is the crime rate is actually higher at pharmacies than in the cannabis businesses. So if you were to be comparing it against liquor stores, it's probably going to be even safer than liquor stores. So, I mean, the fact that you had almost half of the rate of calls in one business versus the other speaks to a lot of the security requirements that are put in place for them, and you'll have complete control over doing. So I think you need to continue moving forward in the very measured approach you're doing, thinking through all the different aspects and before making any final decisions. And I would not waste money on what would be a major campaign for a vote to determine at the end of the day, you all are the ones who have to make the decisions for the city, and you're getting outreach in a lot of different sources, and you'll be able to take that into account. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rick. Next caller here is Inga Lorentzen-Daumer, and welcome to our meeting.
Thank you very much. I really want to thank Monterey completely for having an online survey that this Pacific Grove senior could actually weigh in on yours. I left lengthy comments, just one, and I only took it once. And the lengthy comment was not even posted on your online report here. Okay, so that's fine. I mean, maybe you only had Monterey, but you did repeat them like 3 times or maybe 4, the same comments, and they were, you know, limited comments. So that is fine. I am so appreciative that you are showing Pacific Grove how to do it because I signed the referendum, not because I'm against cannabis. Believe me, I'm a medical user and I have been for many years, and I'm soon to be 71. And that is because I use it for medical reasons, but I no longer keep a card because it is too prohibitively expensive. So yes, there's a big crossover in medical that would walk into a recreational. Yes, Monterey is closer than Seaside or Carmel, but I really appreciate your doing this, and I'm hoping that Pacific Grove can watch what you're doing and do it right, because I signed the referendum in Pacific Grove simply because they did not follow any kind of legal process, like a sales tax measure to actually tax and be able to collect it. So I really appreciate you allowing me to have, you know, answer in an online survey. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Inga. And our next caller is area code 650, and the last 3 are 366. If you could please unmute yourself by dialing *6.
Hi, this is Jean Rash. I am a resident of Monterey, a property owner in Monterey, a small business owner in County Carmel, down by Rio Road. I joined the consensus in applauding the process. It's been wonderful to watch the outreach, the open-mindedness of really not knowing what the final answer is and being okay with that, and having many hearings, the postcards, the online survey, and we should continue this model. It's wonderful. I'm concerned that it was stated that the neighborhood associations, that 8 neighborhood associations came in support. The Monterey Vista Neighborhood Association did neither come in support or denial of it. We quickly looked at it and said everybody's going to have to speak for themselves on this, and there was going to be public hearings. So I hope you aren't interpreting open-mindedness, which I think the Monterey Vista Neighborhood Association members and residents are open-minded, as support, because that would be a misinterpretation. I appreciate Chief Ober's comments, and in a perfect world where we could have regulations and enforcement of regulations, and life was going smoothly, and the streets were clean and lined, I wouldn't have any hesitation. And I'm not even sure my comments are really even about cannabis. What I want to say is, I do not believe the residents of Monterey can take one more stressor. It's been a uniquely horrible year.
Thank you, Jean.
Okay.
I'm sorry to cut you. I really appreciate you
Bye-bye.
calling in as always, and thank you, Jean. Okay, let's hear from Fernando Alvarez.
Hi guys, thank you for taking the time to have this meeting. My name's Fernando. I'm a licensed operator. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Okay, the timer wasn't going, that's why I'm sorry. I'm a licensed operator in the cannabis industry, and specific to cannabis events. I wanted to offer myself as a resource to the team as you guys continue to push this policy forward, specific to dispensaries and manufacturing, et cetera. I was one of the first businesses licensed in California to do cannabis events, and I've since passed policy like in San Francisco, as well as other cities. And what the license does, and I just wanted to make everyone aware, is that it allows for social gatherings and social consumption of cannabis in a designated area. Like, think of it like a beer garden, but it'll be just for cannabis. The other piece that I wanted to mention is that when you're talking about social consumption, I'm not a fan of the smoke either, or the smell. There's definitely a number of other ways, such as infused drinks, edibles, that also could contribute to a social consumption method that doesn't necessarily have a bunch of blunts smoking in the air, as you've seen. I'll be following up with an email as well as a letter to kind of highlight again kind of this piece. I'm not a resident of Monterey. However, I did grow up there for many summers, as my dad was a manager on Lighthouse Avenue, as well as the Borg's Motel right there on Lovers Point. And so I have a little connection to the city. I often go back there as a kid just to enjoy it. And I'm really happy that you guys are talking about this policy. I do want to highlight the event license, which again, I'm a licensed to do this. I passed policy in other cities, and I'd like to offer myself as a resource to the team to further discuss this possibility with the city. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Fernando. Next caller is area code 831. Last 3 digits is 902. Please remember to dial *6 to unmute. Welcome.
Yes. My name is Nina Beatty. I sent the council my comments earlier last week. I voted for decriminalization of cannabis, and I voted for not throwing people in jail. I didn't vote for commercial cannabis promotion or as a priority for the city. This is a drug. Those with medical conditions, for them, it's available and it's decriminalized, as well as for the general population. But this is a public subsidy of a recreational drug. There's staff time, thousands of dollars, meetings and consultants that are being used already for investigating this. One issue that has not been presented is the adverse health effects. I went on the CDC site, Health Canada, the National Institutes of Health, which usually only give the most tepid response on anything. However, even they warn about brain impacts to cognitive function, including memory loss, reduced brain volume for users, psychoses, including schizophrenia, addiction up to 30% who use. It's in one study. Increased auto accidents, cyclic vomiting syndrome, which was a new syndrome I'd never heard of, testicular cancer links, and the special vulnerability of children. There's already a drug problem at Monterey High. Hashish, which I did not know, is a cannabis product. So hashish is now legal for sale. This is harmful to this community. It sends the wrong signal, especially to children. But the city endorses it. The city staff endorse this. That means endorsing sales and endorsing consumption. This is a pricey product with no impact on, quote, normal users or the black market, has been talked tonight. On the crime statistics, there was no investigation of other areas or other states. Why was there no California data or states like Colorado? Or even, as was stated before, the comparison to liquor stores. This has an impact on small businesses and commercial rent prices, pushing out already struggling small businesses, as it happened in Marina. This won't just be 3 permits. This is the beginning. As was mentioned, events, grows, manufacturing. There is not broad support. 33% of the people on the postcards were strongly opposed. But this is a city priority if you approve it. The net benefit, what is the net benefit after you take out
Nina,
all
I'm
the
sorry.
ongoing city costs for the 3
timer,
permits?
Thank you for calling in. We're going to take the next caller, and it's 204. Please dial *6 to unmute yourself. *6, please. Thank you. Welcome.
Good evening. Tom Raleigh calling, president of Fisherman's Flats Neighborhood Association. And just want to say to the city council and the staff for developing the steps and the pathway that's very logical and makes a lot of sense. Personally, I have been exposed where I've been exposed in the past. When I was in the Navy, I saw a lot of young lives get sidetracked through use, starting with marijuana use, and was underestimated the long-term impact. I think it is a danger. I understand medical use. I can understand people that need it for medical use. The members of, it's not possible these days to really have a homeowners association meeting, so I don't really speak for the whole neighborhood. However, I do want to note that the card survey and the online survey had slightly different questions, and it's sort of been in the report that I saw, sort of equated. So the thing is, one comment I made, I believe it was in the online survey, was that I believe that when the request for proposal or whatever the ordinance developed, I think it should be weighted heavily for having local ownership. City of Monterey residents and taxpayers should have first crack. And I would urge that if you're going to legalize sales, commercial sales, that you start with only 2 or 3 retail shops. If it's decided to be successful and not too costly, it can always be additional 1, perhaps, or 2 added later. I believe that commercial sales should not be allowed in neighborhood residential. And I believe our representative from our neighborhood that attended the neighborhood association tried to get that point across. She said, I wasn't able to attend, but she said she didn't feel that point got across during the meeting. So thank you again for the process.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate you calling in. Next caller here, Jules Weiser. Jules?
Hello, my name is Jules Weiser. I'm a licensed operator here in California. I'm friends with Kathy. She talked first. Thank you guys for putting all this together. I think the packet was incredibly informative, and I thank you for looking over our document. I just would love to kind of bring back up the events and hope that you guys can kind of put that on the table and extend ourselves as well to kind of help with that. I think that it can be a huge source for revenue since we're a tourism-based economy. And the events and, live places can be huge for education and, really kind of educating the masses on what cannabis is the dangers, how to use safely, and how we can move forward with this as appropriately as possible. That's all I have. Thank you, guys.
Great. Thank you, Jules. Next caller is the last 3 digits, 405. If you could unmute yourself, please, and we can then hear from you. So you can unmute on your phone by dialing *6. Please dial *6, and we will then be able to hear you and start the timer. Okay. Well, Mr. Mayor, I think we may have a caller whose phone isn't working or fell asleep at the wheel. So we can, I think that's the last caller. I'd go back to them, but we have no other raised hands for tonight's meeting.
Okay, thanks. Well, you can always blame it on software or the dog. Remember that if we learn nothing else from tonight's meeting. Okay, I just have a comment about the public. I appreciate the folks who called in who have interest in opening a dispensary, and I would point out that we're not close to that yet. But I think you've all seen how well the staff has done the research, vetted, reached out to the public. Ultimately, if a dispensary is approved in the city of Monterey, there will be a similar process in that the staff will take applications and go through the use permit process. And you certainly have a right to lobby the city council. However, I can tell you personally, I'm not going to get involved in that level. That's going to be a staff decision and recommendation. So I would urge all of you, if we end up doing that approval, to work with the staff and share your wonderful thoughts with them. So at this point, Hans, what kind of motion do you need? As simple as to proceed on to the next step?
The reason we made it a special meeting and changed it from study session to special meeting is that I would appreciate if the council would just say, staff, continue your path and bring us back the next step with respect to going towards the implementation. So if that's the pleasure of the council to give me a green light scenario to continue, that's what I would appreciate.
All right. Council, anyone want to put that in a form of a motion then?
Yeah, I'll just. Oh, go ahead, Todd.
Go ahead, Alan. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that I would make a motion that we ask staff to continue moving forward and continue with the plan.
Okay.
I'll second that. And if I could just make one comment, and I'm not sure if it has to be part of the motion, but I know that there's this other element of the special events, and I'm not sure what that looks like in alignment with the process of potentially doing the retail element of it.
It will be part of that. We will keep continuing looking at commercial retail in the city of Monterey. That will include also waging the suggestions that came about special events. You also have a letter in your package from the North Fremont Business District and Kelly Violini, who also are speaking about special events.
And I think it was John Rico who made a comment about the social equity thing from the state, and it would be interesting to hear about that as well, if that's possible in the future reports.
Absolutely, yes.
Thank you, Mayor or City Manager.
And I thought Nina brought up an interesting fact, because I had read, and I can't really cite right off the top of my head, the impact of legalization in Colorado. I don't know if that's something we can find out. I'd be interested to know the pros and cons with respect to the impact of legalization there, without asking the staff to do a million years of research. If something like that's readily available. Also, I think in our staff report, there was a mention that youth, is there an increased use by youth because of dispensaries? And the point being in the staff report was that youth don't use the dispensaries. But I think that's going to be ultimately a question that a lot of us, many of us teachers and retired teachers are going to ask, how does this impact our youth? And so as we go forward, I think those two areas would be helpful to me. Yep. Any other comments, discussion under the motion? Councilmember Dan, then we'll go to Councilmember Ed.
Thank you. I'd like to, again, it's been already expressed through a public comment how well we've worked through this process, and I really appreciate staff's all their help in getting us to a point where we can make a decision. Again, for me, as an educator, it's still very difficult for me to move in a direction that I think shows students and children that this direction may not quite be what we'd like to see them go into, but that's besides the point. I think that I'm cautiously ready to move forward. However, once again, the way I see this is not a family business to me. I mean, a family-oriented business. It's an adult business. So I would like to at least stress to staff the willingness to look outside of the areas of downtown and Lighthouse and areas of business where families can walk by, and I want to see our businesses where families are welcomed at all our businesses, I would think. The second thing is that we talked about diversity when it comes to our economics, and we'll at least diversify our revenue. And I'm not quite sure, relying on tourists again, that we're diversifying that revenue. And the last thing is that if we continue to go through, it doesn't necessarily, the council doesn't necessarily see completed RFPs, but I would definitely like to see the RFP before it's put out on the street. I would like to look at it. So I'm ready to go ahead cautiously and move forward on this, but there's still a lot of unanswered questions that I would still like to get answered first.
Thank you, Dan. I think we share your caution. Councilmember Ed?
Yeah, thank you very much. So as you know, I've expressed my opinion before to this council, so this is probably not going to be a surprise to you that I'm not going to support the motion. I really appreciate many of the callers that were calling and highlighting what I think is the core of the whole issue. And Dan, you kind of touched on it, being a former educator, and Alan, you also, and the mayor also educators. I find it very difficult to stand in front of a child that maybe now they're 18 or 19 or 20 that's in my life, and say that now it's okay because the money appears to be adequate and sufficient enough, and the city of Monterey would like to have more tax revenue. I think there has to be an alignment of values and a certain judgment that portrays what really do we want our community to be about. The numbers tonight are not overwhelming to me. If we went out and we did a vote, it would probably bring more clarity, but I'm still not certain that I can even land on a place where I say what has formerly for my entire life, my family's entire life, and the parents of those that have gone through the ordeal of their children abusing marijuana. Now, you could argue that there are some that don't abuse it, and I get that. And I can argue that there's a place in society for medical purposes of creams or marijuana additives or even edibles for medical reasons. And I understand that, and I'm not against that. But I can't weigh against the adverse impacts that I've seen for so many years of my adult life of people that have gotten themselves too far into the use of marijuana. And tonight we heard from some callers that were encouraging us to look at the medical side, what CDC tells us, what doctors tell us, what the AMA tells us, and we still have the overriding reason that the federal government still has it listed as a Title I and it's restricted. I just don't want to see, and I can't commit the city staff to spend time and valuable resources on something that I'm already at a place where I say, this is a red light, not a green light for me. 11 negative sides of effect of using marijuana: addiction, memory loss, social anxiety disorders, paranoia, heart damage, lung problems, low testosterone, appetite irregularities, risk of greater potency, decrease in motor responses, and poor decisions. Please read the medical information that's out there. I can't support this. I can't support something that promotes a lifestyle that's contrary to what I think that Monterey should pursue. And I think we should raise the bar. It's not about money. And if it was ever about money, shame on us. We should look past the money, look at what it is as a statement of the quality of life that Monterey should be about, and the things that we expect that our community will be able to enjoy. And we're depriving no one of anything by saying no to Monterey. They can go to Seaside, Delray Oaks, Carmel, and many other cities. We don't have to fall in line with the rest of the local cities just because we want to get $200,000, $300,000, or $400,000 in revenue. I think we could make a decision to walk away from that tempting money and do something a little different and say that we don't need it, let the other cities deal with it. So for that reason, I can't support this.
Thank you, Ed. Nicely stated. Any more comments on the motion?
I'd like to just briefly say, first of all, I completely respect Ed's moral position on this. I understand it and I respect it. Here's my view. I don't see the same reality when it comes to cannabis use. I don't see that. And so my experience is different. I don't believe that there is real scientific evidence for most of the harms that are attributed. And when I compare it to other drugs that we actively promote in the city, like alcohol, we have a tobacco shop on Alvarado Street. We have pubs and bars all over the place. We know that there are all kinds of negative effects, but we recognize that in a free society, that adults make choices. We also know that drugs like alcohol and cannabis can be used in responsible ways when properly controlled and properly regulated. So I think that, to me, it isn't simply kind of a craven monetary motivation to approve this and sort of look away from immoral impacts. I don't see it in that way. But then the reality is, it is out there. Our residents can go to neighboring cities. If there are any negative impacts, they're already affecting us, but we get no benefit. And $500,000, which is on the low end of the analysis, and I think there's a lot of reason to think we could generate a lot more than that, is going to affect our ability to bring back library programs. It's going to impact our ability to bring back parks and recreation programs. So it isn't like it's just money to sort of enrich ourselves or enrich anyone. It's actually about providing services that we know benefit kids and the community that we're not going to be able to afford. So that's how I look at it. I do totally understand and respect the other point of view, but I appreciate the staff research that went into this report. And I think we just need to continue to move forward and have more conversations.
All right. Very articulate as always. Thank you, Council. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Hoffa.
Yes.
Councilmember Smith.
No.
Councilmember Albert.
Yes.
Councilmember Williamson.
Yes.
And Mayor Roberson.
Yes.
Thanks.
With a yellow light, caution. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, public. Again, I would encourage the public, especially those who are interested in dispensaries to go through channels, go through our staff, please. And also everything you send us in writing, as you saw tonight, we read it very, very, very carefully. Our meeting's adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Good evening.